My mother begged me to save her house, the very house she kicked me out of 10 years ago. She had no idea that I was the one who was taking it from her. Before we dive into the secret I've carried for all these years, please take a second to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and drop a comment below guessing what the final twist will be. Now, where were we? For a decade, the silence from my mother was a physical presence in my life, a heavy, deafening weight that settled in my chest and never truly left. She had cut me out of her life with a surgical precision that felt less like a family fallout and more like a calculated amputation. I was a limb she had deemed non-essential, a problem solved by severing it completely. In the gaping wound left by that abandonment, I was forced to build a new life, a life constructed from the rubble of her rejection. It was a life she knew nothing about, had never asked about, and I was sure had never even wondered about. Then last Tuesday, a name I hadn't seen in a decade flashed across my phone screen, an electronic ghost appearing in the middle of an otherwise peaceful afternoon. It was her. My hand trembled as I stared at it, my heart a frantic bird beating against my ribs. A small, foolish, wounded part of me whispered that this might be it, the call of apology, of regret, of reconciliation. But I knew better. She wasn't calling to mend the bridge she had so gleefully burned. She was calling because the fire she had set was now threatening her own home, and she needed me to put it out. In that moment, I was faced with a choice that felt both impossible and inevitable. Do I help the woman who shattered my world, or do I let her finally face the consequences of her own actions? The truth is, the choice had already been made months ago in a sterile office boardroom, and she was the last to know. I was 19 the day my mother officially erased me from her life. There wasn't a big, dramatic fight, no shouting match that the neighbors could gossip about. It was quiet, cold, and brutally efficient, executed with the emotional detachment of a CEO firing a redundant employee. Looking back, my entire childhood was a prologue to that moment. I wasn't just an inconvenience. I was a guest in my own home who had long overstayed her welcome. My younger brother, David, was the sun around which our family's universe revolved. He was the golden child, and I was just the long, resentful shadow he cast. Every memory is tinged with this truth. I remember one Christmas with piercing clarity. He was 8 and I was 12. He came downstairs to find a brand new, gleaming bicycle with a giant red bow, the one he'd circled in the catalog 100 times. I received a secondhand sweater from a thrift store, a faded maroon thing that was rough and itchy against my skin. It smelled faintly of someone else's life, of mothballs and a perfume I didn't recognize. When I forced a smile and tried to look grateful, my mother didn't even look up from her coffee. "Don't be so dramatic," she'd said. Her voice clipped. "It's practical." Practical was her mantra, her justification for 1,000 tiny cruelties. It was practical to give my brother the bigger bedroom with a view of the garden, while I got the cramped attic room that was freezing in winter and suffocating in summer. It was practical for me to get a job at 16 to pay for my own school supplies and field trips because it builds character. And it was practical for her and my stepfather, a man who saw me as little more than a piece of furniture, to miss my high school graduation, where I was giving the valedictorian speech because David had a meaningless end-of-season soccer game on the same day. Each dismissal was a small cut, a paper cut on the soul. But after 19 years, those thousands of cuts had bled me dry of any hope that I was truly wanted, that I was loved. The final straw, the act that severed the fraying cord for good, was college. I had worked tirelessly, sacrificing my social life to earn a partial scholarship to a decent state university. It was my one ticket out, my glimmer of a future I could build for myself. But it was only partial. I still needed help to cover the rest of the tuition and living expenses. My parents had a college fund, an account they had spoken of for years as a sacred promise. When I approached them, my acceptance letter in hand, my heart pounding with a mix of terror and hope, I was met with a wall of indifference. "That money has been earmarked for your brother," my mother stated, refusing to meet my eyes, busying herself by sorting through mail that was suddenly fascinating. "He might want to go to a private university one day. We have to be practical." My stepfather chimed in, a cruel smirk on his face. "If you can't afford it on your own, maybe college isn't for you. It's not our job to fund your pipe dreams." I stared at her, at my mother, searching her face for any flicker of warmth, of pride, of motherly concern. There was nothing, just a cold, hard finality that settled in my bones. In that moment, I realized I wasn't her child. I was a line item on her budget that she was finally, happily zeroing out. The scholarship was contingent on a family contribution, which they flatly refused to provide. They weren't just declining to help, they were actively sabotaging my only escape route. So I left. That night, I packed 2 suitcases with my thrift store clothes and the few books I owned. I walked out the front door and didn't look back, the cold night air feeling like a slap of reality. I kept expecting a call, a text, a sign that my absence had even been registered. But the silence that followed was absolute, profound, and complete. She didn't just let me go. She pushed me out and bolted the door behind me. That is the anatomy of an abandonment. It's a one-sided decision, made by the person who holds all the power and delivered without a shred of remorse. Those first few years were a special kind of hell. I was functionally homeless, working 3 soul-crushing jobs, waitressing during the dinner rush, stocking shelves overnight in the dead silence of a grocery store, and cleaning offices before dawn, the smell of bleach clinging to me like a second skin. I crashed on friends' couches until I had worn out my welcome, then in the cramped back seat of my beat-up car, and eventually, a tiny, roach-infested room I could barely afford. I ate so many instant ramen noodles that the smell of the seasoning packet still makes my stomach turn. Every day was a raw, visceral fight for survival, and through it all, I was haunted by how easily I had been discarded. The shame was the worst part. It was a deep, gnawing conviction that I must have been fundamentally unworthy of her love. It's a heavy, toxic thing to carry, the core belief that the one person on earth who is biologically programmed to love you unconditionally decided you simply came with too many conditions. But slowly, painfully, a different feeling began to take root: anger. A cold, hard anger that became fuel. I enrolled in a community college, taking night classes while working myself to the bone. I earned a 2-year degree and transferred to a university to finish my bachelor's in business. It was there I met my husband, Mark, a man who showed me what real, unconditional support felt like. When I finally found the courage to tell him my story, my voice shaking as I recounted the years of neglect, he didn't offer pity or platitudes. He just got quietly, fiercely angry on my behalf. He and his wonderfully normal, loving family became the family I never had. They showed me that love wasn't a transaction, but a gift. Together, Mark and I were a team. We were ruthlessly frugal. We saved every dime, our shared goal a future that was stable and secure. Everything my childhood wasn't. I poured all my pain and grit, all that desperate energy from my survival years, into my work. I discovered I had a knack for seeing value where others didn't, for finding potential in things that were broken. We started a small real estate investment company from our spare bedroom. Our specialty became distressed assets, properties on the verge of foreclosure, tangled in legal knots, abandoned and left for dead. We weren't vultures. We were renovators, not just of buildings, but of situations. We bought the debt, we took on the problems, we cleaned up the mess, and we built a business. It was grueling, relentless work, but after a decade, we weren't just okay, we were successful. We lived in a beautiful home, we had a robust savings account, and most importantly, we had peace. I'd gone to therapy. I'd cried, I'd raged, and I'd finally understood that her inability to love me was her failure, not mine. I had accepted that my mother was a ghost from my past, not a player in my future. I was free, or so I thought. The phone rang on a Tuesday. Mother! The name on the screen sent a jolt of ice water through my veins. My hand was trembling as I answered, my throat suddenly dry. Hello, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Is this you? She asked. Her voice was exactly the same, brittle, impatient, devoid of any warmth. No hello. No. How have you been for the last decade? Just a demand for confirmation. Yes, it's me, I managed to say. A tense pause hung in the air, and for a foolish, hopeful split second, I let myself dream that this was the call I'd secretly fantasized about for 10 years, the one with the apology, the explanation, the regret. I was so wrong. I need your help, she said, the words rushing out in a torrent of entitlement. Your stepfather made some bad investments. We're in trouble. The bank is going to foreclose on the house. I was stunned into silence, the audacity of it sucking the air from my lungs. The house I grew up in feeling like a ghost. The house I was unceremoniously kicked out of. What? Was all I could get out. We need $30,000, she said, as matter-of-factly as if she were asking to borrow a cup of sugar. I know you've done well for yourself. I saw it on the internet. You have a nice house, a business. You can afford it. The cold fury that washed over me was immediate and dizzying. She hadn't spoken to me in 10 years, but she'd been watching me from a distance, not to check on my well-being, but to track my net worth. She had been appraising me, waiting for my value to appreciate enough to be useful to her again. You haven't talked to me in 10 years, I said, the hurt feeling as fresh and sharp as it was a decade ago. And you're calling me to ask for money. I don't have time for your drama, she snapped, her voice turning venomous. This is serious. Are you going to help your family or not? It's your childhood home. My childhood home. It was her house. It was my brother's house. It was my stepfather's house. It had never, not for one single day, felt like mine. There was no remorse, no acknowledgement of the decade of pain she had inflicted. She didn't want a daughter. She needed an ATM. I told her I would think about it and hung up, my hand shaking too badly to hold the phone. I broke down. All the walls I had so carefully built around that old wound just crumbled. My husband found me sobbing in the kitchen, and I told him everything. A small, wounded part of me, the 19-year-old girl still crying on a friend's couch, was screaming, "This is your chance. Help her, and maybe she'll finally love you. Maybe she'll finally see you." But the woman I had become, the woman who had clawed her way to a life of peace and success, knew better. Giving her the money wouldn't buy her love. It would only validate her belief that I existed to serve her needs. It would teach her that my boundaries, my peace, and my self-respect were all for sale at the right price. But something about her story felt off. Bad investments. It was too vague, too clean. My professional instincts, the very skills that had made me successful, kicked in. I told Mark, I'm not saying yes or no until I know exactly what's going on. For the next 48 hours, I wasn't her estranged daughter. I was a forensic investor. Using my company's resources, I dug into the public records associated with her property. The truth was far worse than bad investments. My stepfather had a severe gambling addiction, and he had been bleeding them dry for years. But that wasn't the real betrayal. I found the documents for a second mortgage, taken out 8 years ago. The reason? It was a $100,000 gift to my brother, David, to fund a failed tech startup and buy a sports car to impress his friends. They had leveraged their own home, their future, not for an emergency, but to continue spoiling the golden child long after he was a grown man. The college fund they denied me was just the beginning. They had sacrificed their own financial security and were now asking me to sacrifice mine all for him. And then, I found the final piece of the puzzle. The pivotal piece. The bank had sold their non-performing loan months ago to a private debt holdings company to get it off their books. I pulled up the file on the purchasing entity. It was an anonymous LLC. I typed the LLC's name into our internal company database. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, and then I hit enter. And my heart stopped. The name of the company that held the deed to my mother's house, the entity that was legally foreclosing on her, was mine. My company had bought her debt 3 months ago as part of a bulk portfolio of distressed mortgages. I was the one foreclosing on my mother. I was the one about to take her house. I leaned back in my chair, the screen's glow illuminating my face. A slow, chilling laugh escaped my lips, a sound utterly devoid of humor. It was the sound of cosmic, poetic, and terrible justice. For 10 years, I had been building my kingdom, brick by brick. And now, the woman who cast me out into the street was kneeling at the gates, begging for entry, having no idea that the queen on the throne was the daughter she had thrown away. I let her wait until Friday. When I called her back, my voice was steady, my pulse even. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind 1,000 times over the past 2 days. She answered on the first ring. So, did you decide? Are you transferring the money? I have, I said, taking a slow, deliberate breath. I'm not giving you the money. The silence was followed by sputtering, incandescent rage. After everything I did for you? I raised you. I put a roof over your head. This is how you repay me. What exactly did you do for me? I asked, my voice dangerously calm, surgically precise. Did you support my dreams? Did you show up for my accomplishments? Did you offer me love? Or did you just provide the bare minimum legal requirement of shelter until it became an inconvenience? You didn't raise a daughter. You managed an expense. And when that expense got too high, you cut it. The line was dead quiet. I could hear her sharp, ragged intake of breath. I'm not saying this to be cruel, I continued, the power in my voice something I had never felt before. I'm saying it because it's the truth I've had to live with. I know about the gambling, Mother. I know about the second mortgage you took out to give David $100,000, 8 years after you told me you couldn't spare a cent for my education. Your bad choices led you here. Not me. She was speechless. You called me for a transaction, I said. And as it happens, I am in a position to offer you one. You see, a few months ago, my company acquired a portfolio of distressed loans. And your mortgage was in that portfolio. The bank doesn't own your house anymore, Mother. I do. The silence on the other end of the line was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a world crumbling, of a power dynamic shifting seismically and irrevocably. So here's my official offer, I said, switching into my professional tone. I will not give you $30,000. The foreclosure will proceed as scheduled. However, once my company takes possession, I am willing to offer you a 12-month lease. You can rent your home, my home, from me. At the full market rate, of course. You can be my tenants. You didn't want to fund my pipe dreams, but you will be funding my retirement. I told her her choices were her own, just as I had been forced to own mine all those years ago. Then, before she could find her voice to curse me or beg me, I said, I'll have my assistant send over the paperwork. And I hung up. It was the hardest and easiest thing I have ever done. I didn't feel triumphant or joyful. I felt a deep, profound sadness for the mother I never had and the relationship we could never have. But for the first time in my life, I felt completely, utterly free. I chose myself. I protected the life and the peace I fought so hard to build. In the end, reconciliation can't be forced, and it definitely can't be bought with a last-minute bailout. It has to be earned with humility and accountability. Without that, a request for help is just a demand in disguise. Letting go of the hope that my mother would ever change was the final step in my own healing. I'm not that scared 19-year-old girl anymore, desperate for any scrap of affection. I'm a woman who knows her own worth, a worth that has nothing to do with a parent's approval or a bank account. My value comes from the life I built, the love I give and receive, and the quiet, unshakable peace of knowing I finally saved the one person I was always supposed to, myself. If this story left you speechless, smash that like button right now. Tell me in the comments, was justice served, or did I go too far? And don't forget to subscribe, you won't want to miss next week's chilling confession.